People who had a guest ruined the wedding. What happened? Story 1. I have a story to contribute. Although it almost ruined my wedding, my husband and I still haven't figured it out completely. Despite the stress of planning, everything was going according to plan until a few weeks before the wedding, when the owner of the venue was supposed to contact us with the final total to be paid. However, when he didn't, my husband called to ask the amount owed and was shocked to hear the owner say, "Nothing. You canceled the wedding." Confused, we discovered that someone pretending to be my husband had called the venue, used his name and contract number, and canceled the wedding. The only people who had access to that information were possibly an employee of the owner or someone in my husband's family. We tried to get the phone number from the service provider, but they wouldn't disclose it. Furthermore, we faced other issues, such as my husband's brother giving himself a terrible haircut the day before the wedding, without consulting us, the place we planned to take pictures catching on fire, and someone attempting to hack into our wedding email account, which we still haven't figured out. Despite all these obstacles, I'd say our wedding was still an average one. Story 2. This wasn't my wedding, but I was the flower girl. Even though it was a while ago, I remember it like it was yesterday. The bride and her party arrived at the wedding venue dressed in their attire. The bride had her gown, I had my little dress, and the seamstress was supposed to bring the bridesmaids' dresses. However, as the wedding party arrived far in advance, the seamstress never showed up with the bridesmaids' dresses, causing total panic among the wedding party. While I, as a 7-year-old, sat in the corner, not sure what was going on, I approached the bride and suggested they could wear those dresses, pointing to the choir robes in the closet. Her eyes widened, and they ended up wearing the choir robes. The wedding was saved. In summary, the bridesmaids' gowns didn't arrive, and a 7-year-old me suggested they wear choir robes instead. The wedding was saved. I hope the bride was able to get a refund, but that was impressive quick thinking for a 7-year-old, and now the couple has a funny story to tell about their wedding. Well done. Story 3. I once ruined a wedding, but it wasn't my fault, I swear. I was a friend of the groom, and as someone who owned a truck, I was asked to bring chairs and a table to the reception hall. I agreed and was told I would be met there by a few women and some guys to help unload everything. One of the women was attractive, and we flirted a bit. She asked if I wanted to take a walk along the river near the reception hall, and I agreed. Our conversation became more heated as we walked, and we ended up making out on the riverbank. When we returned to the hall, I invited her for a ride in my truck. Being in rural Indiana, we found ourselves on a numbered country road in the back of my truck, laying on a blanket in no time. It was late in the evening, and there was no one around. Then a car approached us. We stayed still, waiting for the car to pass, but the girl who was with me earlier got out and started screaming at us. To my surprise, she was the bride. The wedding was canceled, and my friend punched me in the face. He later found out that I had no idea who she was and apologized. We're good now. It was quite a scandal for a while. To be fair, your actions may have actually spared the groom from potential future difficulties. Furthermore, as it was not done intentionally, it can be considered a fortunate outcome for all parties involved. Story 4. I was a guest of a friend of the bride, and I was unfamiliar with anyone in attendance. The venue was extremely upscale and extravagant, with several hundred guests present for this very traditional Italian wedding. During the cocktail hour, the maid of honor grabbed the microphone and began her speech, clearly inebriated. The speech rapidly descended into a series of inappropriate and insensitive comments, including claiming that the deceased mother of the bride had been against the wedding and that this was the main reason for her death. She also made offensive remarks about a person named Vinny and his involvement with prostitution. Several guests stepped in and forcibly removed her from the microphone. The unfortunate result was that the once happy couple eventually separated and divorced within a year. Story 5. I recently attended a wedding where the bride and groom had purchased a wedding package on Groupon to save some money, which is a smart decision for just one day. However, it seems that the venue thought they could also save money by cutting corners. They put us in a room that reeked of cat urine, causing some guests to leave immediately. The only beverages available were from a vending machine, and the ceremony had to be paused multiple times due to the noise from planes taking off from the nearby airport. Unfortunately, all of the guests ended up with food poisoning the day after the event. Story 6. We attended a wedding for a family member who didn't have a lot of funds. Although the venue was inexpensive, it was lovely. My heart ached when only a third of the invited guests showed up. The hurt on the couple's faces was evident. They approached our table and asked if we had any friends in the city, as they lived an hour away. They had prepared food for 100 people, but only 30 guests had arrived. They were even willing to invite complete strangers just so their food and money wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't yet handed over our card with cash, so my husband quickly went to the ATM and added an extra $100. It's really heartbreaking to see a couple's special day to be impacted by such low attendance. It's great to see that you and your husband stepped in to make their day a little bit brighter by contributing extra funds. It just goes to show that even small gestures can have a big impact. Sending well wishes to the happy couple. Story 7. The groom's father groped both the bride and his daughter, and my girlfriend at the time, multiple times each. Ended up getting punched out by his son and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. Story 8. In 2009, on the second day of a wedding in Tenerife, the bride went out for a swim in the ocean and swam out too far. She was lost at sea for about 9 hours and eventually made it back, but in poor condition. The whole day, everyone was in a panic, thinking she had drowned. By the time she returned, she wished she hadn't. The husband found her phone and discovered she had been having an affair with the best man for years after reading messages from her supposed aunt. Photos they were sending each other made it crystal clear that it was not actually her aunt. The couple got an annulment shortly after the wedding, which cost around $60,000 and was one of the most extravagant weddings I have ever attended. Story 9. I was studying photography and used to assist a well-known wedding photographer. One day we went to a couple's wedding and I was assigned to shoot black and white film while the photographer shot digitally. I spent the entire day with the couple from 9 a.m. until 2 a.m. the next morning when we left. During that time, I saw how deeply in love they were and got to know them quite well. The next morning, I received a call from the photographer and his voice was shaken. He told me that the groom had been murdered that night after the reception. 3 men had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts, and when the groom tried to stop them, they executed him in front of the bride. This news was a shock to me, and I was in disbelief for 2 weeks. This incident occurred in South Africa, which may help explain why it happened. The following weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We worked together to speed up the process and, at our own expense, gave her the photos of her husband without charging her a penny. My photos were more candid and captured the couple's natural moments together rather than just the staged wedding photos. The bride was in tears from the moment we arrived until we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the woman I had met just a week earlier, and her reaction still haunts me. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been for you as a photographer to experience and witness such a tragedy. It's truly touching that you and the other photographer went out of your way to present the bride with the photos and didn't charge her a penny. It must have meant the world to her to have those memories of her and her husband, especially during such a difficult time. Story 10. This was a wedding I worked at as a waiter. During the reception, the photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids. Unfortunately, the bride landed badly and dislocated her knee, causing her to pass out and go in and out of consciousness. An ambulance was called and her knee was eventually treated, but she wanted to continue with the wedding despite the injury. During the meal, she had the first course and threw up down her dress and had to sit with her mother in another room while the rest of the guests danced. It was heartbreaking to see the bride spend the rest of the evening crying. Story 11. I wasn't present, but my friends told me the story of the best man's speech at the reception. He revealed to everyone that he and the groom had been lovers since college, and that if there was justice in the world, they would be getting married. The speech was made in front of everyone, and it was described as frickin' epic. Well, at least he was polite enough to wait until after the wedding to ruin the wedding. Good job! Story 12. I used to work at weddings, and the best one was when the estranged and divorced father, who had not been in the picture for 20 years and was not invited, showed up. He recognized the bartender as his ex-wife's friend and started grabbing anything available to throw at her. The police had to escort him off the premises. Reply 1. As a dishwasher at a university restaurant, the servers came into the kitchen after the wedding reception had ended and told us that the groom's drunk father was loudly declaring that he was going to go watch his son have intercourse with his new wife. Wow, I really missed that one. Story 13. My mother stole my marriage license. I got married on Sunday, but my aunt was taking flash photography the entire time, despite the announcement made by my officiant regarding no photos or videos. As a result, my photographer couldn't capture the shots I wanted. My mother and aunt were also being incredibly rude and difficult to everyone, being very bitter and snobbish. During the signing of the license, I set it in my purse and walked away to get some wine. When I returned, I caught my mother going through my purse. She claimed she was getting gum because the brisket was too dry, but it wasn't until later that I realized my license was missing. I'm now faced with the task of obtaining a new one because my mother took it. Story 14. At my boyfriend's, at the time, aunt's second wedding, his cousin Beth got drunk and accused a 12-year-old girl of coming on to her man, even though her boyfriend wasn't even there. She shot glares at the girl during the ceremony and rolled her eyes during the vows. At the reception, Beth cornered the girl in the bathroom, slurring her words and threatening to knock her out. The poor girl was just crying and asking what she had done wrong. When her mother finally asked Beth to leave, she became angry that no one was taking her side. It was hard to feel sympathy for a drunken, overweight adult who was threatening a frightened 120-pound child. The fight brought down the entire reception, and only around 30 people remained after the incident. Yikes, what a complete and utter mess. I feel so sorry for the 12-year-old girl who was subjected to Beth's drunken outburst. Threatening a child and causing a scene at a wedding is completely unacceptable. I'm glad the girl's mother stepped in to protect her, and that the right people took action to get Beth out of there. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially an innocent child. Story 15. So here is my contribution. My husband and I got married 12 years ago, but our big day was ruined. At the time, we lived in Oregon, while all of my family was in Georgia. Since my large family didn't have the financial means to travel, and his family is small, we decided to have the wedding in Georgia. The problem started as soon as we started planning. My sister-in-law would make comments about how we should just get married like she and her husband did on Christmas in a small church with a few people. She made many other suggestions that were not appreciated. Then on Christmas morning, 9 months before the wedding, my husband asked his dad to be his best man. It was a touching moment, but later that night, his sister cornered him to ask why he didn't make her husband the best man. This led to a family fight on Christmas Day. More incidents happened, but I'll move on to the wedding day. We were all getting ready at a rented beach house. My sister-in-law was being passive-aggressive and making everything about her, while my husband was stressed and acting out. For pre-wedding photos, we were supposed to meet at a park, but we got lost and went straight to the wedding venue. Somehow, my husband and his sister started fighting in front of guests. She was manipulating and pushing buttons, while he was blaming her for not showing up at the park for photos. I finally arrived at the venue with my soon-to-be husband, hands in pockets and saying, "What the frick?" My sister tried to defuse the situation, but my sister-in-law called her an idiot. The minister even threatened to leave because of the fighting. After the ceremony, my sister-in-law had a horrible expression in every photo with her, and then had the nerve to tell me during my reception that her day was ruined and she would never speak to her brother again. 2 days later, as I was packing to leave the beach rental, she came into my room to complain about how hard the week was for her. She went on to say that there was God knows who sleeping on the couch, my best friend since 4th grade, and unruly, undisciplined children running around, my nieces and nephews, who are actually great kids. My husband occasionally brings up renewing our vows, but after that experience, I have no desire for a vow renewal. Our marriage is now happy, but I don't want to relive those memories. Story 16. Recently, I had my wedding, and we woke up happy and excited to get married. However, my soon-to-be husband received a text from his mother. To give you a little background information, his mother had waist-length black hair. However, she had cut and colored her hair exactly like mine, shoulder length with brown and blonde streaks. I was extremely upset and frustrated. Of all days to color her hair, she had to choose my wedding day. Despite my anger, I decided to let it go and just forget about it. Finally, it was the moment we had all been waiting for. I was walking down the aisle when we reached the front. The parents were called up so that we could all recite a vow together. Our wedding was held in front of a riverbank for reference. His mother then proceeded to walk around me near the pastor, instead of staying with the other parents near the groom. She screamed loudly and fell, grabbing my hair as she did so. I fell with her, and we ended up inches away from the riverbank. My moment was ruined. She got up, laughed, and walked away while I was still on the ground, trying not to cry. To be honest, I don't remember much else from the ceremony. I was so angry that I couldn't even think straight. My husband and I no longer speak to his mother, and I refuse to ever talk to her again. My husband fully supports my decision. To this day, whenever I think about my wedding, I get teary-eyed. She ruined my special day and didn't even apologize. For those of you who believe she fell and couldn't help it, after watching our wedding video, we saw that her husband and the pastor were holding her arms. She deliberately stepped back and fell. I can't believe the mother-in-law would have the audacity to copy the bride's hair and then ruin the ceremony. That's just disrespectful and immature. It's good to see that the couple stood their ground and no longer speaks to her. Your wedding day is supposed to be one of the happiest days of your life, and it's heartbreaking that it was ruined by someone else's selfish actions. I'm glad you have your husband by your side and that you're both able to move on from this experience. Story 17. My aunt had a fancy and formal wedding, and as a 4-year-old adorable relative, I was selected to be the flower girl. The day was long, with hair and makeup, photos, and lengthy Baptist vows, making even the most attentive adult tire and become bored. As we were standing in line at the altar, the preacher finally asked for objections. At that moment, I yawned as loudly as my little lungs would allow, and the once silent room filled with 200 friends and family erupted into laughter. It was then that I realized 200 people were watching me, causing me to become scared and act like many other scared 4-year-olds do. I peed, cried, and tried to run away. So there I was, a 4-year-old in a pea-soaked pink taffeta dress, running around the church while my mother, the maid of honor, struggled to catch me, which is not easy when you're running in heels and a ball gown. That's priceless and innocent. The whole family will talk about how cute you were for the rest of your life. You turned what could have been a boring wedding into a memorable day. Story 18. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I attended a cousin's wedding. For a little girl like me, everything was wonderful with so much sugar everywhere. It was like heaven. The reception was held in a large community center that was reserved specifically for the occasion. I went to the girls' bathroom and passed by the men's room, where I saw my uncle on the floor. I returned to the main room to tell my dad that my uncle was looking strange. Unfortunately, my uncle had suffered a stroke and had passed away. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family members left. On a positive note, the marriage has been going strong for 20 years now, despite the tragedy that occurred that day. Story 19. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after receiving a terminal diagnosis. It was uncertain whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding, but in the end, he was too unwell and unable to attend, despite wishing he could be there. Just as we arrived at the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had passed away. It was a devastating moment. Story 20. The wedding was held at a state park renowned for its giant gorge and waterfall. It's unclear who suggested taking a photo overlooking the gorge, but the entire wedding party agreed to it. As they went around a stone security barrier, the maid of honor unfortunately fell off the cliff, plummeting over 500 feet to her death. Story 21. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk her down the aisle. While we waited, the air conditioning in the venue broke, making it even more uncomfortable with the already over 100-degree and humid weather outside. The crowded venue became unbearable as it was difficult to move without bumping into someone else in the heat. The air conditioning problem also affected the refrigeration, causing most of the food to spoil and leaving only salad, spaghetti, and rolls on the buffet, which wasn't enough to feed even half the guests. Many people left after the first dance, and 2 of the bride's aunts even fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were both in tears. I can only imagine how much stress and disappointment they must have felt on what's supposed to be the best day of their lives. The broken air conditioning, spoiled food, and fainting guests just added insult to injury. I hope they were able to make some happy memories despite all the setbacks. Story 22. Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. The wedding started off on the wrong foot, with the best man, who also happened to be the groom's brother, making inappropriate and hurtful comments about the bride and her parents in front of several hundred family and friends. The situation only escalated when the groom, despite being warned not to, shoved cake in the bride's face. This caused her to storm off, and she was not seen for 20 minutes. Despite the tension, the reception went on as planned. But it was reported that the bride got drunk and passed out in the street while still in her wedding dress. Unfortunately, the couple is now divorced. Story 23. My wedding was ruined by the rain and cold weather. To make matters worse, no one turned on the lights, so the few pictures I have are dark and grainy. My parents had divorced earlier that year, so my dad hated seeing my mom for the first time and didn't stay long enough to take a picture with me. My husband's mom didn't even take a day off of work to attend, showing that money was more important to her. Despite all of this, I am happy to say that we just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary. Story 24. The bride unfortunately started her menstrual cycle on her wedding day and was feeling nauseous and in pain throughout the day. She was unable to enjoy any of the food from the buffet as her stomach was too upset, and anything she tried to eat ended up being vomited. Her cramps were so severe that she was unable to stand properly and was seated for most of the event. As a result, in many of the wedding photos, she is seen grimacing rather than smiling due to her discomfort. Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.